We are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela.
So that was President Trump following the U.S. capture of Venezuelan president disputed Nicolas Maduro and his wife. President Trump is saying that the U.S. would run Venezuela temporarily during the transition of power and saying that the U.S. is in charge of Venezuela. But the indictment says this. For over 25 years, leaders of Venezuela have abused their positions of public trust and corrupted once legitimate institutions to import tons of cocaine into the United States. Nicolas Maduro Moros, the defendant, now sits atop a corrupt, illegitimate government that for decades has leveraged government power to protect and promote illegal activity, including drug trafficking. That drug trafficking has enriched and entrenched Venezuela's the military elite, including Minister of the Interior, Justice, and Peace, Diosdado Cabello Rondon, the defendant, and former Minister of the Interior and Justice, Ramon Rodriguez Chacin, the defendant. The two will appear in federal court in the Southern District of New York at noon today. Our cameras are outside. Cameras will not be in the courtroom, but we are there. Judge Andrew Napolitano is our senior judicial analyst. Good morning to you, and good to have you back.
Good morning, Sean. Good to be with you. I mean, today will be an arraignment, meaning it'll take about 5 minutes. You are Nicolas Maduro. He may very well say yes, or he may say, yes, I'm the president of Venezuela, which is what Manuel Noriega said at his arraignment with respect to Panama. The lawyers, we don't know who they are, will be asked, do we need to read this indictment? They'll say no. We've explained it to our client. And then the court will set a date for the prosecutors, the lawyers, and the court to meet in private and agree on the next steps to be taken. The defense will move to dismiss the indictment. What will be the basis for those motions? When will the papers be filed? When will oral argument be held?
What will he be afforded? Will it be a public defender?
Well, I don't know if he has access to any of his wealth. He has a great deal of wealth,
yes,
and should be able to afford the best criminal defense lawyers here in New York City. If he can't, he'll get a public defender. Many public defenders are superb trial lawyers, very familiar with the system. However, they often are overburdened and don't have access to the resources that a high-end criminal defense firm like the team that's representing Luigi Mangione would have available to them.
Sure. So looking at this case, and we're talking about conspiracy charges, the importing cocaine, and the list goes on in terms of what he could face. There's some questions if fentanyl would be involved. That was labeled a WMD. That's a question for later on down the road. But in terms of the charges that he's facing now, Maduro, what weight does that carry in terms of punishment?
Oh, he's looking at incarceration for the rest of his life. It's not a death penalty case,
yeah,
but I believe he's 62 or 63, and you're talking 20 years for each of these charges. One of the charges, I believe, is frivolous. That is the possession in Caracas of a machine gun. Now, that machine gun was not used in the United States, and it wasn't possessed in the United States. It is illegal in the United States, but he apparently possessed it in Caracas. I don't know why they threw that in there. The others are classic conspiracy charges. So he's not accused of manufacturing cocaine, of delivering the cocaine. He's accused of protecting the people who have done it and being rewarded financially for that protection and using the levers of government power to afford that protection.
With Nicolas Maduro, in respect to Maduro, and what legal team will be built at some point, what will be that argument? Will they challenge the extradition process?
I think they'll challenge everything. They'll say that he is the president of Venezuela, whether the American government thinks it or not. And if that's the case, he's immune because he is the head of a sovereign country. They'll say he was kidnapped. They'll say this was an invasion and it wasn't sanctioned by the United States Congress. They'll say that the American government operated illegally. Now, There's a principle of law in which a defendant standing before a judge, the court doesn't really care how the defendant got there.
Yeah.
They beat me up. They pulled me out of bed. They humiliated me in front of my spouse. The court doesn't care. You may have a civil action against the government for the harm they caused you, but you're here. We're going to try the case. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is this was an invasion. This was the decapitation of a government, and the President of the United States does not have the legal or constitutional authority to do that. Will those arguments be made? I think they will, but they probably will not carry the day. To me, the most interesting argument, the strongest weapon he has, is he's familiar with aspects of the American government that have been involved in drug trafficking, namely the CIA, and his threat to reveal that could be used as a bargaining chip.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about as well in the discovery process. There would be, you would think, some sort of classified documents, classified contacts, if you will, that may or may not be revealed that could obviously cause harm of national interest to the United States.
Yes, look, there are instances where the government has decided not to proceed with a prosecution because the harm to the government is greater than the good that would be produced by the conviction of the defendant. I don't know if this is one of those cases, but it's a card that he can probably play. Now, how could he prove this? He'd probably have to put on the witness stand people most reluctant to testify, and maybe people who are not in the United States, and he wouldn't have access to their testimony. He probably also has personal knowledge about this himself and probably could name names. This is the type of thing that would be negotiated between the lawyers behind the scenes long before a jury is summoned to decide, you really want to go through with this? You really want to expose what the DEA has done and how they've looked the other way? I'm not suggesting, Sean, that the American government has done this, but I'm suggesting that there is evidence that he could get his hands on which could frustrate his prosecution.
Do you, really quickly, do you draw ties to Manuel Noriega back in '89, how he was apprehended, obviously facing 40 years, the Panamanian dictator, how that went down versus how this went down? Is there a precedent for this administration?
There's clearly a precedent. Noriega's arguments that he was the head of state were rejected by the court because the court found that he was not the legitimate head of state. That would probably be an outcome here, although I don't know. I'm smiling a little bit because Judge Hellerstein, notwithstanding his tenure on the bench, which has been very long, is a civil libertarian. He's one of those judges that believes the Bill of Rights means what it says. You can see why I'm smiling, since I was in that same category. So the government might not be in for an easy time of it.
All right, Judge Andrew Napolitano joining us. Good to see you back, Judge.
Did you warm up since New Year's Eve?
Yeah, I thawed out. I thawed out.
Right, I used the wrong phrase. I should have said thawed out.
It took a bit. It took a bit.